What happens when a powerful judge mocks the wrong 18-year-old in open court? Your Honor, I'm just trying to explain what happened. The words barely made it out of Jameer Benton's mouth before a sharp laugh cut through the silence. Judge Diana Rothwell leaned back in her chair, shaking her head like she'd just heard the punchline of a joke only she found funny. "Oh, so now you're a lawyer too," she said, smirking as she adjusted her glasses. "Did they start handing out law degrees at high school graduations now?" A few soft chuckles floated from the benches in the back. Jameer didn't move. He didn't flinch, but you could see the tension in his jaw. His fingers clenched around the sleeve of his jacket, the cheap polyester bunched up in his fist. It was his first time in a courtroom. He hadn't expected to be welcomed, but he didn't expect to be mocked either. Jameer stood alone at the defendant's table. No lawyer, no family, just a quiet teenager with calm eyes. His pressed blue shirt, a size too big, tucked into khaki pants like his mom used to make him wear to church. The name City of Detroit v. Jameer Benton flashed on the little monitor next to the bench. It looked as ridiculous to him as it felt. 18 years old, just graduated from Cass Tech High School. And here he was, being laughed at by a woman who probably made more in a month than his whole block did in a year. All because he spoke out. That was it. "I was at a public meeting," Jameer said again, his voice even but low. "I was voicing a concern. That's not disturbing the peace." Judge Rothwell rolled her eyes and leaned forward. "Mr. Benton, this is a courtroom, not a podcast. You're not here to give speeches. You're here because you disrupted a lawful assembly. Whether you agree with the charge or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that you raised your voice, refused to sit down, and were escorted out by a security officer." Jameer blinked slowly. "With all due respect, ma'am, that's not what happened." "With all due respect," she repeated mockingly, mimicking his tone. "You should consider showing a little more humility before this court. Your attitude isn't helping." Jameer swallowed hard. He could feel it. The invisible line she wanted him to cross. The one where if he got too loud, too passionate, too anything, she'd slap him with contempt and call it justice. He'd seen enough videos to know how this could go. And the way she kept leaning into that smug tone, it was like she was daring him to slip up. "I don't have an attitude," he said quietly. "I just don't think it's fair." Rothwell sighed dramatically, then turned to the clerk beside her. "Put a note on the record," she said. "Defendant is argumentative, lacks respect for the court, and refuses to take responsibility for his actions." Jameer's heart dropped. Those words, they weren't just words, they were stains, things that would follow him around, words that future employers and landlords and anybody with a background check could pull up in a second. And there wasn't a thing he could say that would make her change how she saw him. Not really. To her, he was just another kid trying to sound smarter than he was. Another defiant voice in a long line of court appearances she probably didn't even remember. But what neither of them knew, not yet, was that someone was watching. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone sitting quietly in the second row, flipping through a leather notebook with steady hands. And everything that was happening, every word, every snide remark, every smirk, was being documented. But long before the truth came out, Jameer would have to remember how he got here in the first place. A week before the courtroom, Jameer was sitting on a folding chair in the basement of Elston Community Church, the only spot in town that still hosted public meetings without a metal detector. The air smelled like old wood and burnt coffee, and the radiator clicked like it was trying to hold on for dear life. The place was packed. Parents, grandmothers, local organizers, even a few teenagers from his high school. They were there to talk about Section 9A, a cluster of apartments near State Fair Avenue that had gone without heat for over 2 months. Rats in the hallways, mold crawling up the walls. One tenant had posted a video online of her bathtub water running brown. It went viral for all the wrong reasons. Jameer wasn't just attending the meeting. He was one of the people speaking. He didn't do it for attention. He wasn't trying to go viral. It just didn't sit right with him, seeing his friend Terry's little sister catching asthma attacks from that mold and no one in charge doing a thing about it. So when they opened the mic to public comments, he walked right up. No notes, no rehearsed speech. Just a kid with a hoodie on and a voice that didn't shake when it mattered. "I live 2 blocks from those apartments," he said into the mic, his eyes locking with a row of board members sitting stiffly behind a long table. "And I know y'all don't come around there. But if you did, you'd smell the mildew before you even got to the front door. You'd see trash piled up 3 stories high because the chute's been jammed for months. You'd hear babies crying at night because their moms are trying to boil water to keep them warm. There was a murmur in the crowd, a few "that's right" and "tell it" coming from the back. But the board chair, an older man with silver glasses and a nameplate that read Reginald Banks, didn't look amused. Jameer went on, "You all want us to stay calm while people are getting sick in their own homes, but nothing changes unless somebody gets mad. And I am mad, because my people deserve better. We deserve heat in the winter. We deserve clean water. We deserve respect." That's when the board chair held up a hand. "Sir," he said sharply, "your time is up." "I'm not finished," Jameer replied. "You are now." One of the security guards at the back of the room started walking forward. "Are you serious?" Jameer asked, stunned. "I'm talking about kids freezing at night, and you're cutting me off because I don't fit into your 3-minute timer?" "Remove him," Banks said, not even looking up. The guard grabbed Jameer by the arm, not hard, but with just enough pressure to make it clear that staying wasn't an option. People in the room were shouting now, not all of them, but enough. A woman yelled, "Let him speak!" while someone else pulled out a phone and started recording. Jameer didn't resist. He walked out on his own. But the next morning, there it was. A citation slipped under his front door. Disturbing the peace during a public government meeting. Issued by Detroit City Enforcement Division. Just like that, he was no longer a concerned citizen. He was a case number. His mom didn't have the money for a lawyer, and legal aid was booked solid for the next 3 months. So he did what he always did. He showed up anyway. Alone, but not afraid, because if nothing else, Jameer believed in standing on what was right, even when the system tried to twist that into a problem. But standing alone in court turned out to be a whole different kind of battle. Back in the courtroom, Jameer was still standing tall. Judge Rothwell had her chin propped up on one hand, flipping lazily through the thin file in front of her like she already knew how the story ended. "No lawyer, no written statement, no new evidence," she said, almost to herself. "Yet you still feel the need to argue." Jameer didn't respond. He just looked at her. Not angry, not scared, just tired. He glanced at the wooden plaque behind her head. "In God we trust." The words felt like a joke. "I don't have money for a lawyer," he said quietly. "I already said that." "And I already told you," she replied, leaning forward now, voice sharp. "This isn't about money. It's about behavior. You disrupted a lawful meeting. Whether you had good intentions or not doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Jameer said, "and it should matter to the people you're supposed to be working for." There it was. She didn't like that. Her face tightened for the first time since he entered the courtroom. "I don't answer to you, young man," she snapped, "and you're not in a position to lecture anyone on civic duty when you can't follow basic rules of decorum." Jameer bit down on his bottom lip to stop himself from saying something that would only make it worse. But it was hard, so hard, because she wasn't just talking down to him. She was talking through him, like he was a broken radio she didn't have the patience to fix. "I never yelled. I didn't threaten anyone. I just told the truth," he said. "You were told to sit down. You didn't. That's refusal to comply," she answered. "Plain and simple." Jameer shook his head. "So that's what we're calling it now? Speaking up is refusal?" "I suggest you watch your tone, Mr. Benton," she warned, and that's when it happened. She reached for the gavel, but didn't strike it. Instead, she looked directly at him and said, "It's always the ones who think they're smarter than they are." The words just hung there. No one laughed. Not this time. Even the clerk looked up from her screen. Jameer blinked slowly, like he had to process it twice just to make sure he heard right. "That's how you talk to people who come in here for help?" he asked, voice steady but low. "I talk to people based on how they present themselves," she replied coldly. "And your attitude tells me you don't understand what accountability means." He didn't reply, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he was trying not to say too much. He knew the moment he gave her anything even close to frustration, she'd use it against him. He glanced to his left, briefly catching the eyes of someone sitting in the gallery. A tall woman in a brown blazer, hair tied back, no phone in her hand, just a pen. She didn't smile, didn't frown either, but she wrote something down in her notebook. Rothwell must have noticed because her voice shifted again, back to performative. Young man, she said, smoothing her robe, let me explain something to you. The justice system doesn't reward drama. It rewards order, process, patience. If you want to make a difference, take a civics class, or, better yet, learn when to stop talking. The room was dead silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Jameer looked at her and then at the clerk. I hope somebody in here is really listening, he said, because what Jameer didn't know was that someone was, and they weren't just listening. They were gathering everything they needed. The woman in the brown blazer hadn't blinked much since the hearing began. Her name was Celeste Monroe. She worked for the State Civil Rights Oversight Committee, a quiet office most folks didn't even know existed. They didn't advertise their visits. They didn't give warnings. When a complaint came through that hit certain keywords, pattern of bias, repeat offender, hostile treatment, they assigned someone like Celeste to observe. She didn't carry a badge, didn't wear anything flashy, just a notebook, a trained eye, and a sense for when someone in power was getting too comfortable. And Judge Rothwell? She was very comfortable. Celeste had been sitting there for nearly 40 minutes, watching the way Rothwell leaned back, rolled her eyes, cut people off. None of it was new. Celeste had already read 5 prior complaints, all filed separately, all about different people, mostly young Black and Latino men under the age of 25. Dismissive, rushed, unprofessional. That was how the people described her. But paperwork didn't always tell the full story. That's why Celeste was there, to see it for herself. And she saw everything. The smirk when Jameer tried to defend himself, the way the judge mimicked his words, the condescending tone, the personal digs. She saw how the courtroom clerk flinched a little when Rothwell snapped, how the bailiff kept his eyes on the wall like he didn't want to be part of it. And she saw Jameer, standing there like a grown man who hadn't even started his life yet, trying to hold his ground without losing his voice. Celeste had been in rooms like this before. Different judge, different city, same look. That mix of arrogance and boredom. Like people were just items on a conveyor belt, and fairness was optional. She jotted another note down. Dismissed him before hearing full statement. Mocked education level. Adversarial tone without provocation. But she didn't intervene. That wasn't her role. Not yet. Her job was to observe and report. And as much as she wanted to stand up and say, this is wrong, she knew better. These moments had to speak for themselves. And they were. The court session dragged on. Judge Rothwell began calling up the next case, acting like nothing happened. Jameer had to sit back down, waiting to be dismissed like a school kid who spoke out of turn. Celeste kept writing, watching, documenting. Every so often she'd glance toward Jameer. His back was straight, hands in his lap, still quiet, still composed. She was impressed, honestly. A lot of adults would have snapped under that pressure, but he didn't. Then she noticed something else. A young man in the second row behind Jameer leaned over and whispered, "Keep your head up, bro." Jameer nodded slightly, didn't look back, just breathed out slowly, like he needed to push the air out of his chest. Celeste smiled to herself, not because it was over, but because she knew Rothwell didn't realize what was coming. The committee wouldn't be sending a letter, they'd be sending an internal review officer, and Celeste's notes? They'd be part of an official record Rothwell wouldn't be able to laugh off. But before the hammer came down on the bench, Rothwell would get a quiet knock on her own door. The courtroom emptied out just after 3:00 p.m. Jameer was one of the last to leave, slowly gathering his things while the fluorescent lights buzzed above like they were just as tired as he was. He didn't know what had just happened. Not fully. He just knew it didn't feel right. None of it had. Outside, the Detroit air had that heavy, wet smell that warned of rain. He walked down the courthouse steps with his hands in his pockets, not looking at anyone, just thinking about how the judge never even let him finish, how she talked to him like he was already guilty of being himself. Behind him, the side door of the courthouse opened. Celeste Monroe stepped out, calm and quiet, just like she'd come in. She didn't speak to Jameer, not yet. But she made a quick phone call from the sidewalk, her voice low and steady. "Yes," she said. "I observed the full session. I have what I need." Pause. "Yes, I'm recommending immediate internal review. This one's not just a paper complaint. We have a pattern, and now we have evidence." That evening, while Judge Rothwell was still in her office sipping lukewarm coffee and reviewing the next day's docket, she got the email. Subject line, "Notice of Judicial Oversight Inquiry. Immediate attention required." She read it once, then twice, and when she saw the name Celeste Monroe at the bottom of the page, she pushed back from her desk. They'd warned her before. Nothing formal, just whispers in the hallway, a few grumbles from other judges, a private word from a peer about how her tone in certain cases could be off-putting. She ignored it every time. But this wasn't a whisper. This was official. This was real. The next morning, she was told to step back from presiding over active cases pending review. She tried to push back, called it an overreach, claimed kids like that just don't know how to behave in court. That's when they showed her Celeste's notes, verbatim quotes, timestamps, descriptions of her body language, 5 detailed pages, backed by prior complaints. It wasn't just about Jamir anymore. He was the last straw. The review board didn't care about her excuses. What they cared about was what her behavior said about the integrity of her courtroom. Meanwhile, Jamir was at home, lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan spin slowly above him. He hadn't told anyone about the court yet, not even his mom. She'd been working doubles at the hospital and didn't need anything else on her plate. But around 10:17 a.m. the next day, his phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject, case closure confirmation. City of Detroit versus Jamir Benton. He opened it slowly. Mr. Benton, this notice is to inform you that your citation has been officially withdrawn. No further action is required. Your record will be cleared within 5 to 7 business days. He read the words 3 times, then read them again. No explanation, no apology. But it didn't matter. He smiled. Not because he won. There wasn't really a victory in any of this, but because he knew what it took to get there. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't begged. He just stood up and told the truth. And somebody finally listened. Later that afternoon, a quiet email circulated through courthouse staff. Judge Rothwell had been placed on temporary leave pending a full conduct review. No public statement was issued, no press release. But the attorneys in the building noticed. So did the clerks. The shift was small but real, because word travels fast when power finally gets checked. But Jamir's journey wasn't over. He had one last thing to do. Something simple but powerful. Something he needed to say out loud. 3 days later, Jamir stood outside the Jefferson Branch Library, a small building with chipped bricks and a missing J on the sign. It was quiet there. No judges, no glares, no clock counting down his words. Inside, a community forum was starting. Same kind of setup as the last one. Same folding chairs, same lukewarm coffee. But this time, nobody had to drag him out. They asked him to speak. He almost said no, almost told them he was too tired. But something about the email from the event organizer, how she'd heard what happened, how she wanted the community to hear his side, made him say yes. So here he was, hoodie on, hands in his pockets, and a little piece of paper folded twice in his back pocket, just in case. When it was his turn, he walked up to the mic and looked out over the room. A few familiar faces, Terry, Ms. Franklin from across the street, his old English teacher, Mr. Hill. They were all here. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. A couple people chuckled. "I'm not a politician either. I'm just a young man who saw something that didn't feel right and said something about it. And for that, I got dragged into court." He paused, took a breath. "They tried to make me feel like I was the problem, like speaking up made me dangerous, like being young and black and confident meant I had no business asking for better." The room went still. "But what I've learned," he continued, "is that sometimes you gotta speak anyway, even when you know it won't land right, even when people laugh, even when the room turns on you, because silence doesn't protect us. It just keeps things broken." His voice didn't shake, not once. He could feel his nerves, sure, but he owned the moment. "I want better for us. I want kids growing up on my block to know they don't have to shrink themselves to be heard. The courtroom should be about justice, not ego, and that nobody should be mocked for telling the truth." A few claps scattered across the room, then more, not loud or dramatic, just solid, real. He stepped down from the mic. No cameras, no news vans, just his people. Later that night, he walked back home alone, hoodie pulled up, city lights blinking soft in the distance. The citation was gone. The judge? On leave. But Jamir knew the fight wasn't about one courtroom. It wasn't about just him either. It was about the hundreds of kids like him who walk into buildings like that and get told without words, "You don't belong here." He did belong. And now he had proof. So if you're watching this and you've ever been in a room that made you feel small, remember this. You don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to stand up. Even when your voice shakes, even when they talk over you, even when they try to paint you as the problem. Stand anyway. Because the truth has weight. And sometimes all it takes is one person with the courage to carry it. And if someone like Jameer can do it, so can you. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Speak up. Write the email. Show up to the meeting. Vote for the people who see you. Support the kids who don't have lawyers but still deserve respect. And when you see injustice, say something, even if your voice is the only one in the room.